You know the drill. You check the classifieds, the auctions, and see if you can manage to buy the legendary Nissan R34 GT-R, perhaps as a V-spec model. Of course, the prices have jumped sky high, and a nice one with low mileage will set you back a lot of money. Here in Europe, the prices start at 100,000 euros and a bit less in the States. Let's go for a fantasy trip and say you got yourself a GT-R. The same awesome thing that you saw in that car movie a couple of decades ago. And now what? Where can you get parts, and are you going to need to sell the house to be able to support your GT-R habit? In this video, I will take you on a Nissan Skyline Economics for Dummies tour, and together we shall see if this car is at all reasonable to run and own. And after all is said and done, I hope you're a bit more informed or at least entertained. All this and more in this episode of the Secondhand Buyers Club. Let me give you some spoilers right out of the gates. While working on these buyer's guides at carrepairguide.com, we have discovered some trends. When it comes to the availability and pricing of spare parts, there seems to be a difference depending on the continent. Generally, Japanese cars have a pretty good availability for original parts, and the pricing is on the cheaper side. European manufacturers are on the premium side, with Porsche putting its notorious Porsche tax on pretty much everything. We haven't dipped our toes yet on the other side of the pond, but based on our standardized research methods and my gut feeling, I would say that American sports cars are pretty cheap to run, at least if you live stateside. Taking all this in, how does the Nissan R34 Skyline rank up against its JDM rivals and the rest of the world? Let's find out. Let's start with the basics. In the turn of the new millennium, Nissan produced around 65,000 R34 Skylines, of which about 11,600 were turbocharged GT-Rs. Today we are focusing on these GTR models. The R34 is powered by the same RB26D ETT 2.6-liter twin-turbo straight 6 that powered the two previous GTR models, the R32 and R33. So this engine has its roots in the 1980s. Because of the gentleman's agreement between the Japanese car manufacturers, the car only had 276 brake horsepower, as did its rivals at the time. This was to keep the cars a bit safer for the public. Mostly these legendary JDM or Japanese domestic market cars had actually a bit more power. But the interesting bit here is that partly because of the agreement, manufacturers secretly made these cars to be modified. The RB26 had an iron block and forged internals, which is a bit beefy for a 276 horsepower engine, one might say. And oh boy, did people modify these things. When I was around 18 in the early 2000s, the most powerful cars were almost always tuned JDM cars like the GTR or a Toyota Supra. It needed a Bugatti Veyron with its 1000 horsepower to take the horsepower war to the next level. And even then, you could not miss out on comments about JDM cars going past 1000 horsepower all the time. By the way, if you own an R34 GT-R, do let us know in the comments what it's like to own it. Is it easy to find and get parts? And are some specialty items unreasonably expensive or difficult to find? I will shortly dive into the availability and pricing of the GT-R components, but first I'd like to point out something. Modifying a Nissan GT-R is not frowned upon, as it might be with some other cars like a GT3. It is actually what the turbo JDM car ownership is all about. So don't be afraid to check out and maybe purchase a modified car. But if you do, you are then of course faced with the dilemma of not knowing which parts and components have been used in place of the original bits and bobs. So if you get a leak, you need to figure out a new gasket for your non-standard item. So when cars are in non-modified and stock form, you can easily find replacement parts such as gaskets or other items. But with modified cars with less than ideal paperwork and history, you have to work so much harder to find the right pipes, hoses and gaskets just to fix a leak. If your turbo is an inch larger, there is a hose or gasket that is obviously cannot be replaced with the original 1 inch smaller stock one. On top of this, all this is assuming that the previous owner did a perfect job in building the car to a high standard and not just using zip ties to put it all together. And don't worry, of course, every Skyline has been modded by a team of 100 professional engineers. So you might also be wrestling with the issues that arise from badly executed modifications. You've been warned. So Nissan made quite a lot of special editions of the R34 GT-R. The regular GT-R, Series 1 and 2, V-Spec, V-Spec UK, V-Spec N1, V-Spec 2, V-Spec 2 N1, V-Spec 2 NUR as for Nürburgring, AM-Spec, AM-Spec NUR, Nismo S, R and Z-Tune and Nismo Clubman Race Spec. And then there were 25 cars for special editions or something made for Hong Kong, New Zealand and Singapore. And of these, the Nismo Z-Tune cars were the very special ones because Nissan bought back 19 used GTRs and restored them and kind of hot rodded them and made them very special. And these command the highest prices of any GTR. The basic GTR is the cheapest, while prices are climbing up the further down the list you go. Let's start our deep dive with market values. Outside of Japan, the American market is really the only place where you have plenty to choose from. It is really easy to find these cars from the US compared to the European Union. When looking for multiple sites here in Europe, only a handful of different cars can be found on sale. In other right-hand drive markets, such as Australia, New Zealand and the UK, there's a pretty good selection of cars on offer. In America, prices start from less than $50,000 for the high mileage and heavily modified base models. Highest mileage models that could be found for sale still had only 76,000 miles, 122,000 kilometers, and depending on the condition and amount of modification, can still be priced at between $90,000 to $160,000. In general, original, non-modified, period correctly or Nismo modified cars were the ones that fetched the highest prices. The most valuable cars are the less than 30,000 miles driven M-Spec and M-Spec NUR. Examples painted in Millennium Jade or any low mileage V-Spec models maybe in Midnight Purple. These cars are easily priced at 400,000 or more. Most variety can be found between 25,000 to 50,000 miles, and where the prices vary from $100,000 for a modified one to over 200,000 for less modified Midnight Purple example. On this medium range, we spotted multiple cars with suspected odometer rollbacks, so be sure to keep an eye out for this while browsing. Within the European markets, the pricing is once again higher than on other continents. This can also be explained by the shortage of cars being on sale, as it was never sold here new and the steering wheel is obviously on the wrong side. The highest mileage one had 75,000 kilometers, 46,000 miles, and was priced at 210,000 euros or 240,000 miles with minor modifications. The lowest example was a V-Spec 2 NUR with 8,500 kilometers, 5,000 miles, and with a price tag of over €500,000 or over $600,000. Next up is the actual meat of the burger. So let's go to carrepairguide.com, where we have our buyer's guides here for you to go through and enjoy. But let's find the Nissan Skyline GT-R R34 right now. Great. So in this segment, I will go through why we have given the car a 6 out of 10 second-hand buyers club rating. I will talk to you about the sub-scores below the picture of the car. I will go through the big ticket items, and we have our standardized list of service parts, which I will go through and then compare to other cars as well. And we have our interesting components and findings list, which we'll comment as well. So let's start with the big ticket items. And here, as you can see, you can still get a new RB26 engine from Nissan for 22,400 euros. And that's $26,000 or so, plus shipping and tax and so on. But you can get used ones for around 10,000 euros, $12,000. But basically, you can get used RB26D TT engines or blocks and parts from the used market. And when it comes to internal components for you to rebuild the engine, at least with stock components, the availability from Nissan is great. So when it comes to the main drivetrain unit, the engine, you should be good to go for now if you want to rebuild or you need to fix something. When it comes to the transmissions, your options are way less. You can't get a new one, you can't get a refurbished one. Used market availability is not great or good at all. And it was pretty difficult to find used transmissions. In the engine big ticket item box here, it says that we could find like engine plus transmission combos being sold. And Nissan doesn't really sell internal components for the transmission. And but I'm not quite sure if there's how many aftermarket components are available for the transmission internals. But considering that the Honda Civic Type R, the first one, which is on an old car, you can get pretty much every internal components for the transmission, which is pretty nice for Japanese brands seem to do that more. Just to compare to the Honda Civic Type R, the first one, you can actually get all the internals from Honda to rebuild, like if you destroy your synchros launching the car or something. So that's a great thing. But for the Skyline, it's more difficult. And differentials, you can get a new differential for around 4,000 euros, 5,000 bucks. And some internals are available from Nissan as well. So that's a good thing. So powertrain, everything else is pretty good except for the transmission. So make sure that the transmission works when you test out your Nissan Skyline that you might be buying. So next up, let's check out the service item list here. We have 4 categories of components: engine maintenance, engine accessories, brakes, and suspension and steering components. And as you can see, the whole standard list is very standardized so that every car that has a diesel or fuel engine should have also all these components. But let's start with the engine maintenance. Of course, you can get all these bits are fine if you go aftermarket as well. So you can, but I don't know if you're saving that much money. 6 spark plugs, valve cover gasket, engine oil filter, and so on. Pretty cheap from Nissan, and we'll be comparing these to other cars shortly. And the premium stuff, you can actually pay more for your premium oil and everything else if you so fancy. Engine accessories, well, this gets a bit more expensive. Water pump 360 for $100, sorry. Thermostat, cheap. Starter motor 850. Alternator over €1,000. So you can add like 10-15% on top for the US dollar prices. I don't know what the current exchange rate is right now, but yeah, add a little bit to make them in dollars. But yeah, the starter motor and alternator are very expensive. Usually it depends. You might get one for original ones for like 500 or 300 euro, depending on the car and model and so on. But you do have aftermarket options going very cheap. So no worries if you want to go the cheap route. Of course, everything is by default more expensive from the manufacturer. But the radiator, 1,500 euros, super expensive. You have all aftermarket options. But if you want to keep your car stock, original, then you are paying a hefty premium to buy the original bits from Nissan. Let's go to brakes. And this is our biggest pain point, you could say, for the pricing of all these parts on this list, because the brakes are stupidly expensive from Nissan. Of course, going aftermarket might actually give you better brakes. So going for Brembos or something, you end up having better brakes for much less money. But for instance, if you want to go and keep the car original, you are paying. So if you want to keep the car original, you are paying a hefty premium, because for an E60 M5 or E39 M5, the brake discs, which are super expensive, are like 500 euros a pop, which are, yeah, like I said, super expensive. So these are 1,500 plus, so $1,800, super expensive, as are the brake pads. But this can always also mean that they're just selling the last stock they have, and especially the European car companies, BMW, Porsche, they know how to squeeze out every last euro or dollar from the last part, like for old cars. And I'm not sure if Nissan is doing that or is there some other reason why these are so expensive. Do leave a comment if you know. But at least the European car makers are just squeezing out everything when the stock is running low. But this is the biggest cost group for the Nissan. So if the brakes, if you just go with premium everything for the brakes, and even go like original starter motor, alternator, the whole list doesn't actually cost that much for the Skyline. It's, except for the brake, this is pretty cheap. And here we have shocks, which are from 400. I remember paying 700. Was it for one or two? Sucks, not even BMW branded, but basically OE struts for my E39 M5, and they were like way more expensive. But yeah, and it doesn't have availability for lower control arms front and in the front, so you have to go premium, find some old ones. Let's do R34 GT-R Skyline. Let's see what these babies look like. All right, so the problem is that it does have one ball joint, but there's a bushing. I guess that's another bushing. So you can press out the bushings and replace them, but you can't fix the ball joint. So that's one Nismo Heritage transfer. All right, so this might be a problem if your ball joint is a bit loose. But yeah, super expensive original. Then you'd have to buy the premium ones, 900 to add to the list. So this would be 3,000-4,000. But yeah, and here you can see how much it totals for the original parts, missing a few. So basically you need to add like the premium lower control arms to this 13,600, making it 15,500. Very expensive, but the brakes are super expensive. You can save like 5,000 euros from there, making around 10,000. And if you alternator and starter motor take a premium aftermarket, then you're under 10,000 euros. And that's an important thing to remember. And going different, cheapest or medium or premium aftermarket, you can of course save a lot of money. An important takeaway is that our standardized list of consumables is something that the aftermarket suppliers provide in multiple price points. But remember, there are a lot of components, such as the trim pieces, that are not available usually from aftermarket vendors. This is when it becomes expensive to go with a brand like Porsche or with any other car where original parts are pretty expensive. If you are just trying to keep the car running, you should be okay with aftermarket parts. But if you want to do something more, such as restoring the interior or full rebuild of the engine, you will need some original parts from the catalog as well. But let's remember, there are a lot of components, such as trim pieces, that are usually not available from aftermarket vendors. This is when it comes expensive to go with a brand like Porsche or any other car where original parts are quite expensive. If you are just trying to keep your car running, then you should be okay with aftermarket parts. But if you want to do something more, such as restoring the interior or rebuilding the engine, you will need some parts from the original catalog as well. And next up, let's compare this data to other cars. So here we have, up here, compare with other cars. Let's start the comparison with some JDM cars. So, of course, A80 Toyota Supra. Let's take Civic Type R, because it's more quite a rare car and wasn't sold in Europe as new. And maybe let's take the Honda NSX, because that's in the same ballpark price-wise as the Supra and Skyline these days. The Honda Civic, of course, much cheaper car. And yeah, so let's start by comparing here we have the original equipment selected up here. And yeah, more or less a few $100. And if you go median aftermarket, yeah, you can see that the Honda seems to be the most expensive here. It doesn't matter if you go premium aftermarket or median or original, but the Honda NSX, which is the most exotic car here, is the most expensive in this group. Let's go to engine accessories. Well, the Civic Type R is missing a few bits, starter motor and alternator, so we can't compare this 1,500 directly. We can maybe assume like 500 euros each, that would be 2,500 here. But the Toyota Supra and the Nissan Skyline are pretty similar in cost for the original, and of course the NSX is the most expensive one. Let's go for a median aftermarket. And yeah, so in premium aftermarket, it's pretty often the same story if you go cheapest aftermarket, median, and premium. But yeah, the Toyota Supra and Nissan Skyline are pretty head-to-head, with the NSX being the most expensive here. And even if you go cheapest aftermarket, which you really shouldn't do on any of these cars, please don't. There's the same trend of the Civic being the cheapest and the Honda being the most expensive one. And when it comes to brakes, we have original equipment. Just check this out. New brake discs and pads, original, for the Honda NSX, 1,400. Toyota Supra, 1,100. 780 for the Honda Civic, and 7,300 for the Nissan Skyline. So that's one thing that only if you have like a really low mileage, though if you have a low mileage car, why would you need to change the brake discs unless you want them just to look nice? But I don't see any point in going for the original brake discs for a Skyline, since that whole car is being kind of designed to be modified. So go for Brembos or something else. AP Racing, I don't know what's the JDM favorite brake disc set, but yeah, this is pretty interesting to see how the brake discs are super expensive for the Skyline. Let's check out cheapest aftermarket. Well, super cheap for the NSX for some reason, the cheapest one here, but as I said, do not buy the cheapest aftermarket parts for any of these cars. Don't be that person. And median aftermarket, pretty cheap, all for everything, Skyline being the most expensive here, and premium aftermarket, Skyline being the most expensive here. That's quite interesting. So somehow they are quite unique, the shape and size for the Skyline. So that and also I think when the originals are so expensive, the aftermarket vendors kind of price their own products to reflect that, knowing that we can ask for more and still be so much cheaper. And yeah. Then let's go to the last group of suspension and steering. Here, original equipment selected, Honda NSX 4,700, Supra 4,200, and we are missing lower control arms for the Skyline and the Civic Type R. But these were like 900 per side. If we go for the premium aftermarket, which would make this closer to 4,000, matching the NSX and the Toyota Supra. So the NSX is so exotic, so it doesn't have, not every part is available aftermarket for that. And remember, this list is so standardized and the most common and this list is such a standardized list, and it includes the most common serviceable items, so that all the aftermarket vendors usually produce these parts. Meaning that if you go outside of this list, you quickly find out that, for instance, for the Honda NSX, there are no aftermarket options. So this list reflects the most used consumables, which wear out and you have to change. And that's why the aftermarket companies create products for these product categories. But when you step outside of these sort of components, then you find out quickly that, for instance, for an exotic car like the NSX, you don't have any options on the aftermarket. So this list does not reflect the fact that that the car has everything available for every other bits and bobs. And for instance, for the Carrera GT, there's absolutely no aftermarket components available except for suspension and wheels or something, and exhaust. So all the consumables here are pretty well available for these, at least in these brackets. Suspension strut, shocks, original shocks, 300, 600, 400, and so on, and premium, much cheaper. But if we just go and check out the end results, like I said, that we need to add the lower control arms from the premium brackets to the Skyline, making it around 15,000 euros. But then if you don't use original brake discs and pads and use premium aftermarket ones, this will drop to 10,000. So basically all the JDM legends, the Honda NSX, Toyota Supra and Nissan Skyline are pretty much on the same level when it comes to serviceable item cost, which means the NSX is at 12,000 euros, Supra at 9,400, and if we don't use original brake discs and pads for the Skyline, we get to be around 10,000 euros for the R34 Skyline. And we are missing quite a lot of parts for the Civic Type R, but if my memory serves me correct, this would be around 5,500 or so, of course being much cheaper than any of these other cars. But let's check out the... Yeah, unfortunately I can't do a proper comparison because we are missing some random bits on every other car on different category, which actually tells a story as well. But yeah, you can save a lot of money by going aftermarket, of course, but when it comes considering the type of cars these are, I don't think these are that expensive. And let me show you why I say that. And compare this to 911 GT3, 997. Let's do a E92 M3. And maybe E46 M3 CSL, because that's in the same price bracket as the GT3 and the Skyline. The E92 M3 is going to be the cheapest one at 6,000 with original parts, 6,500. The Porsche 911 GT3 comes with the Porsche tax, which is 23,000 euros to use Porsche parts. And the problem is that the GT3s are collectibles in a way that they need to be original for them to be the most collectible and most valuable. So that if any of these cars kind of deserves or needs original parts, I think it's the Porsche, and you will pay that Porsche tax. So buying a 911, 997 GT3 for 140,000 euros and then having to pay the Porsche tax on every bit serviceable item is going to cost you. And for the Skyline, like if you remember just from a minute ago, and for the Skyline, it'll be around 10,000 euros, around the same as the M3 CSL. Actually, the E46 M3 CSL is pretty same as for the regular E46 M3, unless you destroy your bumpers or you need to replace the exhaust or something, then it gets super expensive. But all the running items for the CSL, very good. Considering that a good example CSL here in Europe cost 140, 160,000 euros, because of course they are very limited in numbers, and it's an amazing car to drive. So the M3 CSL is so much cheaper than the Porsche, and it on the same level as the Skyline. And funny enough, the E92 M3 is the cheapest here to go with original parts. And we can go for a premium aftermarket. We are missing something on the brake pads front, not a big deal, doesn't change so much. And engine mounts, we are missing here. Well, original engine mounts from Porsche for the 997 are 1,600 euros for a pair. So still, even using premium aftermarket, the Porsche is super expensive, and you can get away quite a lot with the Skyline and CSL. Of course, for instance, the CSL, just like the GT3, they kind of weren't meant to be modded. And if you just modify or use aftermarket parts for a CSL, that's not a good look when trying to come up with a value for a collector's car. But yeah, in a way, the Japanese cars are the best ones to be modified, and they don't take a hit in value in the same way. Of course, there are, you can go way overboard with that, but some, Nismo tuning and contemporary bits and bobs are quite all right. Next up, let's check out the interesting components list. This is a list of components that we just stumble upon while we do research, and we actually do research. We spend days creating one article and then another day or two to create this video. You can actually get an original turbocharger for Skyline for 1,600 euros, $2,000. AC compressor, 1,400 euros, $1,700. Pretty expensive. Engine cover. So this is the hood or bonnet, 6,600, over $7,000. Oh, this is interesting. You can still get a new dashboard for your Skyline for 1,200 euros, $1,500. A rear spoiler available for 1,600. A front splitter and floor carpet assembly, 1,200, which are pretty decent. I just bought a floor carpet, the whole thing, for my E30 M3 for 1,200 from BMW. Very lucky it's still available. It's going to make the car look very fresh and smell fresh. So, but yeah, there are a lot of bits and bobs still available. Some at decent price. AC compressor, not a cheap price. And the thing is that if you want to keep the car original, you go for the super premium price or use an aftermarket one to save 1,000 euros. Yeah. The last thing will be the secondhand buyers club rating, which is 6 out of 10 for the Skyline. Like I said with the big ticket items segment, is that trim pieces, emblems, so on are quite difficult to find, but everything you need to keep the car running mostly can be done with stock components. Of course, there's aftermarket variant to everything, brakes and suspension and so on. So you can keep these cars up and running, no problem. But it is not perfect. But let's go through the sub-scores for the Skyline. Here you can see availability of original parts is actually pretty good. But of course, if your car is modified, then you don't need all those original parts. But for an original car, you can get away with quite a lot. The minus points come from like trim pieces and so on that might not be available. Pricing for original parts, this gets a 4 out of 15, but it would be a bit better if the original brakes weren't so expensive as we went through. So if you're going for a Skyline, it doesn't have to be 100% original. Go for better aftermarket brakes, save a lot of money, and then you'll it would basically get a bit better points for pricing. Aftermarket availability and pricing for aftermarket parts, 18 out of 30 points. Used market, 6 out of 10 points. There are, engines and parts there, not super easy to find or in big numbers, but there's a healthy aftermarket or used market for the Skylines. Very enthusiastic crowd. Online search, it's pretty easy to find the right component for your Skyline. Of course, if you buy a car that is modified, then it's pretty difficult to figure out like what kind of gasket goes here, or do you have to make it yourself or so on. With original cars, it's always easier to find parts and replace them. Ease of work, 7 out of 10. Minus points mostly come from having a turbo setup and four-wheel drive, but it is quite a simple car. Let's say 9 out of 10 without those two things. And age of the car, 2 out of 5 points. Totaling at 59 points out of 100, giving a second-hand buyers club rating of 6 out of 10. Now, let's go and see where it lands on our ranking lists. Just to point out, our first car with a rating of 9 is a Mazda MX-5, first generation. And there we have a few 8s here, a GTI, Mark IV, a few BMWs, even including the E92 M3. But let's find the Skyline at number 19 at this point. As you can see, on top of it, all the same points, 911, 997, Carrera S. Coming there are kind of different ways. Both have good availability. Porsche is better, but everything is very expensive and so on here. But let's compare these. Let's just check out the Japanese cars. Honda, Mazda, Nissan, and Toyota. Here we go. So from here, we can see that the Skyline is not doing that well. So the Supra is a bit better when it compared to the Skyline, and the smaller, cheaper cars, the Mazda MX-5, Honda S2000, and the Civic Type R, the first one, the EK9, score a bit better than the Supra and the Skyline. And the worst punch here is the original 3.0 Honda NSX. Or getting back from the side quest, the Honda, they made 18,000 Honda NSXs, the first generation car, over a very long period of time. And they only made, what was it, 11,600 Skyline GT-Rs, but they made 56,000 Skylines. Which one is more exotic? GT-Rs are more exotic than NSX, but the body shape is not. So, but the NSX is, but the Honda NSX does come last on this list compared to these cars. And while you're in there, you can come here and play with this yourself, but you can also select and sort out per category. So let's see, ease of work. Honda S2000, MX-5, Civic, and then 8, 7, and 7. And the Supra gets 1 point more because it doesn't have a 4-wheel drive. Well, there you have it. Nissan Skyline, 6 out of 10, secondhand Buyers Club rating. Quick question. What do you think about our secondhand Buyers Club rating system? We have a whole page dedicated in explaining our scoring system, but do leave a comment if you know how we could improve our system. If you're interested in our standardized data set about our beloved enthusiast cars, you can go to carrepairguide.com and compare cars yourself. It is fun, easy, and of course, totally free. So there you have it. The GTRs have become very valuable these days, and also most have been modified. And that comes with the burden of fixing someone else's badly made modifications. And trying to figure out a non-standard hose or a gasket in between a non-standard turbo or intake plenum might be a bit difficult. On the positive side though, availability of original and aftermarket parts is pretty good. For a special car made in low numbers that is also around 25 years old, availability is decent. If the R34 GT-R is something you have always lusted after, I would recommend you to drop your pension on one and just enjoy the ride. But since the values are so high these days, I get that these are not for everyone anymore. And now it's your turn to dive into the buyer's guide at carrepairguide.com. Read, compare, and sign up for the newsletter so you don't miss out when new articles come out. Thank you for watching. I'm afraid that when I open this, I'm just gonna want one for real. Oh, Bayside Blue. Oh my god. There was one Bayside Blue on an auction just a few days ago. I was... Tomica. V-Spec 2 NER. Awesome. Hood doesn't open, but the doors do. Oh, nice.